Hey, Clark. I'm excited to have you here on Behind the Cubicles podcast. I know we're both excited about this conversation on this project here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the creative director at Leary Studio.
Yeah, and I am the founder of Beyond Rockets.
Yeah, and so we're kind of just hopping on Behind the Cubicle here as kind of business owners to talk about sort of what it means to create content as a business owner and maybe the pain points of like finding ways to create a brand image as small business owners and kind of just what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it's often, as a small business owner, the work you do is often the first work that, like, the work you do for your clients is your priority.
Yep.
And doing marketing and doing self-promotion is always the hardest part.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think there's oftentimes, especially early on, and even now, like I would preach to clients to do certain things, and then they would look at my social media and be like, "Well, you're not doing any of it."
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're right, and it's like, and you know it's going to work because you're telling them to do it, and you know it worked for you too.
Yep.
But it's just tough. I think when you sit down and you think about doing marketing for yourself, it's often, where do I start? What
No
do I
doubt.
say? What do I do? And that's a need that Behind the Cubicle is able to solve. And I think it's cool what we're able to do and what it's able to accomplish for a small business owner.
Yeah, man, I think I experienced this pain point that you're talking about, this idea of like, because for me, for the studio, like we make a lot of content for clients in the same way that you do. Obviously that kind of form factor looks different. You're doing a lot of podcast work. My company's doing a lot of like digital media creation and sort of marketing campaigns. But even still, like my focus so often when I'm like building marketing material, it's like, okay, well, how can we kind of spin this to be used on social media? Or how
Yeah.
can we spin this to be used as this? We create this long form content that can be reduced to short form content. And then they're like, how do you know that works? And I'm like, other people, not me.
I've read it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I listened to a podcast about it.
That's exactly right. And so it's like, I've seen this work for my clients. I've seen this work for other companies, your company's clients. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess it's time to kind of put my money where my mouth is and put the work into sort of doing this thing.
Yeah. And I think for me, the shift to doing podcasts primarily has been a good shift just because it's one of those things. It's like I've had my podcast for so long and it be kind of, I didn't realize at the time, but it was that canvas that allowed me to test things and try things. And so being able to kind of pivot on that and say like, oh, I've actually done this, or I'm actually trying this too.
Yeah.
It goes a long way. I think it provides that credibility that, one of having certain clients help with credibility, but being able to actually do what you're preaching to clients to do.
That's right.
And them actually actively being able to see it really helps and goes a long way. So, I mean, Behind the Cubicle, it's able to really do that. And create that content and allow that business or that small business that really needs the content support or wants a different kind of content that's not necessarily the same that they've always done.
Yeah.
Allows them to really have tailored content that's personal.
Not that there's anything wrong with creating graphics on Canva and kind of pushing your company's social media content that way, but like it gives you kind of an easy way to be a little bit more diverse. I think after meeting you, obviously you and I have been working together for probably like a year now. And I've seen like a lot of the growth that you've experienced with your podcast. And it's like pushed me to be like, oh, okay, this matters. So now here I am kind of on Behind the Cubicles podcast to talk about what I'm up to and what I'm doing. And that has spurred me on to say like, all right, so me and one of my other business partners is starting like a long form podcast for this exact purpose, and kind of getting to dip my toes in here ultimately was like the catalyst for that.
For sure. And I think what, with Behind the Cubicle, like dipping your toes is a huge part of it.
Yep.
Because I think when you start talking about, the front end of doing your own podcast, it's a lot.
Yes,
and you're in it right now.
Yep.
Like it's a lot of heavy lifting. There's a lot of things that have to be done on the back end before
doubt.
you can even just launch.
Yep.
And then the consistency of being able to like then clip stuff or make photos or
Yes,
do all
sir.
this. And oftentimes if you're doing your own podcast, you're not able to get a lot of that content. Because you're the one on camera. You're the one having the conversations. You're the one interviewing. You're the one, dictating how the flow is. But you're not able to capture some of the content. But Behind the Cubicle is able to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'd love to hear, like, not the sales pitch too hard, but I'd love to hear for you, like, you went to college, you started this business. I think you probably really quickly saw, like, okay, people knowing who I am probably really matters. And people having like
Sure.
an intimate relationship with me is going to ultimately intimately affect my business. So tell me about what that's done for you, actually, what that's practically done for your actual business.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, so we started the podcast for Beyond Rockets. That's how the business started, was the podcast. And it was 2019 in May. And, no one knows who I am. I have 0 followers on Instagram, 0 followers. Like the page is brand new.
Sure.
I don't think I even had a website at the time. Like
Okay.
I literally just like captured the domain, got the handles, get all that stuff, but you know zero people.
Right.
No one knows who you are.
Right.
You have no credibility. You have no content, and you just start building that out. So we were able to start building it with one person I knew, and then they knew 3 or 4 people, and then within a year, within probably 6 months of doing it, I was having clients doing marketing support for. Just because I'd been out there and been seen.
Yep.
And it was one of those, like, I think at the time we were doing 3 episodes a month, still in college at the time, doing the podcast. And it was one of those interesting things because you get to this point where you're just doing this content and you're not really sure who's seeing it or
Yeah.
if people are enjoying it. Like, it's one thing to see the numbers and go, okay, this is actually valuable. And there's another thing to actually say, oh, this value is actually going to help me. And
Yes,
so
sir.
when we started the podcast, it was never the intention to have a company. I don't think.
Wow.
Maybe like you go back to 2019. I mean, maybe
Sure.
Clark thought that this was going to be a business.
Sure.
I don't think I did.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had an intention. And then you start realizing the need.
Oh yeah.
But I think one of the biggest things too, and the podcast has continued to do this over the last 5 years now, is just having that connection, having that ability to have someone on that you don't know.
Oh yeah.
Because there's many people I message and I have them come on the podcast that I'm like, they have no reason to respond to me, shouldn't respond to me. I wouldn't respond to me.
Sure.
And they're coming on the podcast
Right.
and I get to interview them and ask them questions.
Right.
And that's one of those like defining moments that really kind of separates you. It's been able to separate me from others.
Right.
And I think that's, people feel like they know who you are with a podcast before they even know who you are.
And maybe they've ever introduced. Yeah.
And so
man.
I think that's what, this content has been able to do, what the company's been able to do. And I think with Behind the Cubicle allowing, small businesses that have the same pain points that we've had and we continue to have, even with doing a podcast at 3 episodes a month still with Beyond Rockets, like creating content for yourself and taking the time out of the day to actually schedule content for yourself is like, no one's paying you to do it. So you're like, why should I do it?
Oh yeah.
But at the end of the day, you have to almost separate yourself and say, the company is a client of mine, not I work for the company.
That's exactly right. Yeah. You like, can you kind of begin to work on the business, not sort of for the business?
Yeah. In it and on the business are 2 separate things.
That's right.
And I think having those moments and those times set aside during the week to really do that work is it's not necessarily the fun. You don't necessarily love it.
Sure.
Because you're like, why would someone want to watch this?
What's the ROI on this?
Yeah, like it's just taking some of my time. I should be networking. I should be going to this or doing that.
Yeah.
But there's so much value in the consistency of it. I think we've been able to see with Beyond Rockets just, some of this content and that can have the legs to run and create valuable moments throughout social media and just kind of connects you with an audience that maybe never has heard about you before and can provide some value for them too.
Yeah, man. I think you're kind of talking through your origin story made me think through this. Like when I went from freelancing to ultimately starting a business, right? I think I was like, working a couple jobs. I was doing design work for clients that I would meet through these jobs. And I was like, oh, when I start a company, probably what this will look like is like, yeah, I know there's sort of some business aspect to it, but ultimately I'm going to get to be a designer, right? And I think in my mind,
do the fun stuff because it's my own company now.
Yeah, it's my company. Yeah. So I think I was envisioning this sort of like 80-20 split where it's like 80%, maybe 70% I'm doing design work and 20 to 30% there's this sort of self-promotion or like business management. And that's not the case. It might even be like 90-10 but on the flip side, right? And so I think for me, like something like Behind the Cubicle gives me an opportunity to take that percentage that feels really, really heavy and difficult and make it like kind of a blast to just sit here and hang out with business partners.
And it's one of those, it's what Behind the Cubicle is able to really give in that short amount of time. Like it's the content that we're able to gain from a conversation like this.
Yep.
Because it's not too much time out of our day.
Yep.
Like it's not like it's like I have a 3-hour meeting and I have to drive 2 hours for it. Like it's not that. Yep. Like you're coming in, we're having a conversation, 15, 20 minutes and we're done.
Yep.
And then Behind the Cubicle delivers all the content for us.
Light work.
And we just post it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, it takes the lifting out of self-branding.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's the toughest thing to do as a small business owner, but it's the most valuable thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess kind of that's a kind of an ideal segue. So we've kind of been hanging out for 12, 15 minutes here. We have some other guests that are kind of waiting to hop on today. I think we're both pretty excited about that. So thanks for hanging, brother.
Yeah, it's been fun. I enjoyed it.